Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Buckets. Subscribe to the channel if you're over on YouTube and drop a like on this video. It helps it do better in the algorithm, so that is much appreciated. Also, if you want to enjoy this as an audio-only experience, go ahead and check this out over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This is part 3 of the Power Rankings mini-series. The last 2 episodes I have gone over who will be some of the worst teams in the NBA, who will be some of the more middle-of-the-pack, purgatory tier teams, and then now, of course, we have the conversation that's most interesting, and that is we're going to be ranking essentially every team that I would consider in the contender category, which this year I would personally say that there are 9 of them. Now, I typically consider contenders to be in 2 different tiers. There is the A tier contender and the B tier contender. So towards the bottom of this list, you're getting more of those B tier teams, which are teams that if they won, it wouldn't be a huge shock, but they're definitely pretty far from consensus, pretty far from your first pick out there. But with that said, I've been doing these from the top of the list down to the bottom in terms of like descending order of numbers. I'm going to do the opposite of that for this one. So I think that the worst contender of these 9 teams is going to be the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, the Timberwolves managed to make a Western Conference Finals run last year, much to the surprise of a lot of people. Didn't surprise me too much personally in the first round matchup because, of course, I'm the biggest Phoenix Suns hater in the world, and I predicted them to lose that series rather easily, and that's exactly what happened, even easier than I had anticipated. Minnesota displayed a level of defense that was just not unprecedented, but it was a type of defense that truly was mind-boggling, specifically how it bothered the Denver Nuggets in the second round of the playoffs, because with their double big situation, they were able to put Cat or Naz Reid on Jokic and then have Rudy Gobert essentially just stand right next to the rim, letting Aaron Gordon shoot as many threes as he wants. So that defensive scheme was really heavily predicated, and they were really designed specifically to beat the Denver Nuggets. If that were not the case, they probably would not have made the finals or the conference finals, and the fact that they lost to the Mavericks in the fashion they did kind of displayed that it was a matter of matchups. Alright, I need to make a quick amendment to this video because I recorded it before the Karl Anthony Towns and Julius Randle swaps between the Timberwolves and the Knicks, so obviously everything I said about them is very different now given that change. So let's first talk about the Timberwolves. Honestly, where I stand now, I'm not too sure that we would even categorize the Timberwolves as contenders. I want to give them some time to see what can actually happen here because obviously when they traded for Rudy Gobert, there was a growing period there and things ended up working out. So it's not as though they're doomed or anything, but I don't like this Timberwolves team as much as I did before. While Karl Anthony Towns had his own problems fitting in with the rest of this roster, I don't think Julius is going to be any better at it. His three-point shooting is significantly worse than Cat's. He might be a better playmaker, which could bring in some two-man game with him and Rudy, like bring too much help on a Randle drive, he throws an alley-oop type thing. Also, there's the factor of being able to punish a mismatch, which Cat was very much not able to do in last year's playoffs. So I understand, on top of the financial burden that they were dealing with, why the Timberwolves went ahead and made this move. I also understand that getting Dante DiVincenzo is nice. The more I've reflected on it, I kind of think that they should probably go with Anthony Edwards at point guard as their long-term goal, given that that's kind of just what the natural progression of the shooting guard position seems to be in the modern NBA, which is that you're a shooting guard until you dribble too much, and now we put you at point guard, and we'd rather have an off guard out there. Obviously, Mike Conley is still an off guard, even if he does play the point guard position, but I think I'd rather have Dante DiVincenzo in that starting lineup. So that's something to look at. I like the potential scoring opportunities that he can bring to this team, the fact that there's a little bit more well-rounded of a scoring group here. But overall, I just think Randle and Gobert is really clunky, especially if it's, not even if it would be Randle, Gobert, and Jaden McDaniels. That's just such bad floor spacing. McDaniels and Randle are both lower tier shooters and lower percentage on lower volume guys. Just not who you want to be the guys that you're kicking out to on the perimeter. So for that reason, I'm actually even lower on Minnesota than I was before. Maybe even wouldn't categorize them as contenders anymore. However, this video is, they're in it. Technically, they're still in the conversation, so I'll leave them there, but they are the lowest ranked contender. Even still, they were already that before for me, but this makes it even worse. Next up after that, I was kind of split between who I have at 8 and who I have at 7. Who I have at 8 is the Denver Nuggets. Their top 4 guys are still really good. The problem is, in the modern NBA, you really can't afford to get away with just like a good set of starters and then like a bad starter and a bad bench. You could see and probably find teams that won championships from the past, not even all that recently, where they had a situation like that, where they had a mediocre to bad starter, which is more than likely not going to be Christian Brown this year, and it didn't hurt them too bad. But in the modern NBA, so many teams are so talented and they're so deep that if there is a guy on the floor who you can essentially all but ignore on the perimeter, that is going to seriously affect your ability to get open shots for everybody else. Defenses are going to sag off of that guy. They're going to bring help defense into the action that the Nuggets run. And suddenly getting to the rim is not going to be as easier. Denver has never been a high volume 3-point shooting team, and I don't expect that to ever change. But it does matter that your players hit those shots when they get them. Otherwise, what you have going on inside the paint will become less easy and less prominent. So Denver's lack of depth is something that a couple of years ago I wouldn't use as a heavy knock against them, but if you look at the last couple of NBA champions, it has been teams that can go 6, 7, 8 players deep with confidence, let alone being able to go past 4. So Denver having the best player in the world, in my opinion, and having at least a decent, pretty damn good core 3 players beyond that guy does keep them in the contender conversation. But if they didn't have truly the best player in the world, they probably wouldn't be, and they would certainly be ranked lower than Minnesota. I flip-flopped between Denver and who I have at number 7. This is the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, we recently did a news video where the title was something like, "Are the Bucks a lost cause?" I have been someone who has been more high on this team than others are going into the year because I think some of their issues are overblown, and I think a lot of people are dismissing them based off of 1 year. If I were to compare it to any team, I would actually compare it to the Minnesota Timberwolves, where after they made a very bold move in trading for Rudy Gobert, initially there was some growing pains. Initially, things didn't really work the way they were supposed to, and as a result, the team was rather disappointing. I believe they still made the playoffs, but they did not go far, unlike what they would do in 2024. I'm expecting a 2024 type of year this time around for Milwaukee, where the year following the big trade, where players have gotten a little bit more used to each other, there is the factor of having Dame throughout the offseason, going into the season, knowing that he's going to be a prominent part of the game plan, the fact that you're probably going to have the same coach the whole way through. I expect Milwaukee to be considerably better. I do think a change in their offensive approach could also help things. But one way or the other, I think a lot of people are discounting this team for reasons that don't make a lot of sense to me. I understand why you would be low on them based off of a lot of things last year, based on the age of some of their most important pieces, but they are very good. The offensive duo of Giannis and Dame is still very good, and they still have the pieces to be a competent to even pretty damn good defense. So I'm not dismissing them. I think Dame will be a lot better this upcoming year, and if you get anything resembling a superstar Damian Lillard on this team, then yeah, they're still very much in that contender conversation. That said, they are the worst contender in the Eastern Conference, according to my own summation. The team that I have above them would be the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, this one might be pretty controversial. The Memphis Grizzlies are getting a lot of variance to how people are predicting how their 2024-2025 season is going to go. Some believe that they're going to pick up where they left off, with Ja Morant essentially being right back in the contender seat. Now, when they were in the contender seat, they were definitely very much in that B-tier contender territory, but nevertheless, I think they can go right back to it, especially because I really like the Zach Edey addition, and I think their wing options with Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams Jr., who broke out over this previous season, they really didn't have a great wing option back when they were a contending tier team, because they had fucking Dylan Brooks at the small forward spot. But if Gigi Jackson can be a really good offensive threat and fill his role as a play finisher, or if Vince Williams Jr. can just simply be a super effective 3-and-D guy who doesn't take a bunch of dumb fucking mid-range pull-ups all day, then the starting lineup should essentially be perfect. Ja, Bane, Vince or Gigi, Jaren, and Zach Edey. I think that's a great, extremely well-balanced lineup with a good enough amount of shooting, a good enough amount of shot creation, and some truly excellent defense, I would anticipate. There is the concern of the fact that Ja Morant, for producing as much as he is one of the more inefficient guards in the NBA. He's right around the league average, even a little bit below league average true shooting, especially by comparison to other players in his level of usage percentage and shot volume. So that, just your superstar having that major weakness, is an area of concern. Also, Desmond Bane and Jaren, I do think they're good offensive players, but sometimes they have some limitations to them. Jaren's three ball can be super inconsistent. Desmond Bane isn't always super reliable off of the dribble. Oftentimes you want him to be more of a catch and shoot guy, whether those are movement threes or spot ups. But that said, all of those concerns levied, I don't really think they're too big of issues. And more often than not, what interrupted Memphis from taking it up a notch has been injuries, or in the case of last year, a suspension for Ja Morant, and then followed by an injury, which prevented him from playing more. I think he played like 9 games. They looked really good when he did play, and I think they're just going to pick up right where they left off, on top of things being improved a little bit. I didn't even mention the fact that they have Marcus Smart, who probably will be coming off of the bench. It is possible that he would start and they would play Bane at the 3, but I don't think they're going to go that direction. But yeah, I really like this team. If it's, Vince off the bench or Gigi off of the bench, you are 7 players deep rather confidently. Like, that's definitely 7 good players on your team. Maybe Santi Aldama, if you want to be nice about him too, gets you to 8. Also, Brandon Clark, if Brandon Clark, has he even played yet, or is he going to be playing yet going into the season? Rudy just said Brandon Clark is his 3rd favorite player ever. But if Brandon Clark does prove to be the high-value role player that he was in the past, then that's another layer deep that this team can go, and that's a level of depth that I think is very important for contending now. So yeah, Memphis, I'm higher on them than a lot of people are, and I personally think they would end up being a better performer in these upcoming playoffs than the Denver Nuggets will. Right above them, I have the Philadelphia 76ers at 5. Philly is a team that I think could end up on a wide spectrum. If they ended up being kind of like fucking electric in the regular season, like winning 65 games, I actually wouldn't be all that shocked by that. But I also think if that were to happen, that would be the case of a team winning a lot in the regular season, but not actually being able to hold it up to that standard when the time comes. Obviously, Paul George has had some playoff blunders, and we know Joel Embiid has had a lot. No matter how much you blame that on injury or not, it's definitely a consistent area of concern with him, but I really like the Paul George addition. I think PG as a 3rd option is about as perfect of a 3rd option as it gets. He's an extremely good off-of-the-ball player. He's a good defender, so he can contribute even when his offense isn't going for him, and then he's a pretty good shot creator on top of that. For Paul George to be your 3rd best one-on-one scorer, that is a pretty good situation to be in. That is presuming that is what the hierarchy will be with Tyrese Maxey. Maybe Paul is going to get like a seniority thing, but I wouldn't anticipate that. More likely than not, Paul will be the third option, and I think that roster makes a lot more sense the moment that Paul George is there. Like, the two-man game between Maxey and Embiid will still be in full swing, but Paul George coming off of screens as that action is happening, defense coming in, and like any level of the defense being sucked in, you want to have guys who are going to hit the shot when it's available, and Paul George is one of those dudes who's going to hit that shot, unless it's in the clutch. But other than that, good stuff from them. I like the fit a lot. I don't think their depth is as good as some of the other teams in the Eastern Conference, which is why I'm a little higher on them. They also are not... I mentioned this in their biggest weaknesses issue. They don't really have a point of attack defender who's like, that's his job. Like, Paul George can do it. Kelly Oubre had a couple of good moments doing it against Jalen Brunson in the playoffs, but as a whole, they don't have some guy where it's like, yeah, put that fucking dude on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Anthony Edwards, or if you're going in the Eastern Conference, you're like, yeah, that's who I want guarding Jason Tatum. That's who I want guarding Jalen Brunson. They don't really have that guy, and I think more often than not, when you're looking at these top-tier contenders, they do have that guy. So that is a factor that concerns me. Depth is a factor that concerns me. However, the best situation that Philly has had probably since Allen Iverson was there. I think this is the best roster of the Joel Embiid era, and if you can just get one healthy offseason of the guy, they could actually go quite far. Next up, getting into the top four, we have the Dallas Mavericks. A couple of people I've seen actually be lower on the Mavericks, feeling like last year is more of a flash in the pan and not the reality that we can come to expect from them. But I actually feel like they got better this offseason with the addition of Klay Thompson as well as Najee Marshall. I actually saw a stat the other day that was Najee Marshall is statistically the highest, or I guess it'd be lowest percentage in terms of like field goal percentage. He has the lowest opponent field goal percentage on the perimeter in the NBA last season. Dude is a lockdown perimeter defender and a capable enough three-point shooter that you can afford to play him a lot, and it's not as big of a hindrance as it was for Derrick Jones Jr. last year. And I also added Quentin Grimes instead of Josh Green, who I think Quentin Grimes is a tad better of a three-point shooter, so that should help them as well. But of course, the big addition being Klay Thompson. Like, the big problem for this team, and the only reason that they didn't have a more competitive final series, was Luka had to do fucking everything, and he was injured while doing everything. Like, literally 3 different injuries as he's shouldering all of that offensive load. And then whenever the defense would bring an extra guy and he would find an open shooter, that open shooter would fucking brick that three-pointer. Klay Thompson, as much as he has fallen off in the past couple of years, isn't going to do that. Klay is still a very good, one of the best in the league, catch and shoot guys in the league. And I think a lot of people are also overselling how bad he's been defensively. He's not a bad defender. He's not bad. He's just not a borderline all defense guy as he was at his peak. And that's a significant fall off, but I'm seeing people act like Luka, Kyrie, and Klay is just 3 cones. 3 cones. Shout out to Connor. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think they are going to have the best offense in the NBA. I predicted, one of my bold predictions was they would have the best offense of all time. Another big thing for Klay is that he's had too much of an offensive responsibility in Golden State because of the fact that he's declined, because of the fact that he's never been a super strong shot creator. The fact that, again, as I mentioned with the Warriors in my NBA Purgatory video, they don't have fucking any shot creation besides for Steph. So very often that job would be Klay's. Now he has Kyrie and Luka Doncic. He gets to be a third option. He gets to be more selective with his shooting. He's talked about how he wants to go like the same route that Ray Allen did, where he was able to be a contributor to a contender later in his career, even though he wasn't the same player, of course, referring to when he was on the Miami Heat. So that all is encouraging to me. And I think Klay Thompson's going to be a great addition, especially for the money that he's making. And I don't think the defense is going to be worse. In fact, I think it could even be better because I think Najee Marshall is a better defender than Derrick Jones Jr. was, on top of there being less offensive limitations. So I feel very good about Dallas. I think Kyrie is one of the greatest second options of all time, though he did have a bad final series against Boston. I don't think that's something you have to be worried about repeating. To be fair, Kyrie was facing some of the best guard defense that has ever existed on any NBA team and certainly any contender. So from that standpoint, I think they're going to be fine. Luka Doncic, to me, second best player in the NBA, maybe third if you're higher on Giannis. Sometimes I flip-flop those two. But Dallas, I like them a lot, even though I know I'm going to catch some flack for ranking them this highly. At number 3, I have the New York Knicks. And honestly, I think them and Philly and Milwaukee are probably closer together than some people think. A lot have talked about the Knicks as though they are in their own tier above Philly and Milwaukee. I don't think that is necessarily the case. However, I really like this move. Obviously, I said that in my initial trade reaction. I also did that in my follow-up video about the Knicks that's titled something along the lines of "I'm very high on this team." So yeah, I'm very high on this team. I think that while both Randall and Cat were kind of the black sheep of their teams, Cat is a black sheep that makes more sense on the Knicks than Julius Randle did. So from that standpoint, I think you have dramatically improved your floor spacing. I think you have dramatically improved your center rotation, and you don't have this awkward cog that you have to deal with in Julius Randle. Even if Cat comes with some of his own awkwardness in his own way, that comes from, in my opinion, with Minnesota, it was the scoring after Ant being so heavily decided by him, like to a degree where it's like, look, if you and Ant don't both have good games, we're probably screwed here. On that front, I don't think the Knicks are going to be in that territory where it's like, after Brunson, you better get 20, otherwise we're not going to score enough. There are other options on the floor. OG can attack off of the catch. Josh Hart can attack off of the catch. And Mikal Bridges has been a 20-point per game scorer on good efficiency before. Maybe stepping outside of the role that you would actually like him to have, but one way or the other, we are talking about dudes who are capable of scoring the ball, and you don't have to bank entirely on Cat being your second option. You also have Mitchell Robinson as a backup option to put on the floor, which is nice given the more defensive ability that he carries with him. You have the versatility of being able to play Cat at the 4 next to Mitchell Robinson. So I think the roster fits better. You have hurt your depth a little bit. You don't have Dante DiVincenzo coming off of the bench anymore, which would have been one of the best 6 men in the entire NBA, if not the best. But I think you can get away with Miles McBride and Mitchell as your backup guys. Hopefully you add one more guy that you think can be a prominent playoff rotation guy. However, there is enough there, and the starting lineup is solid enough that I still feel really good about them. I would say they're kind of akin to, not the fullest because the best player difference is rather significant, but I'd say they're akin to the 2023 Denver Nuggets, who, after their 6th man, the bench unit was actually pretty bad, but it was good enough, and their 6th man was strong enough, and their starting lineup was well-rounded and versatile enough that they still managed to put out a good rotation and ultimately win that championship. So for the Knicks, I like this move for them a lot. I think that the team just makes a lot more sense. There's a lot less question marks going into it, and the talent is undeniably there. That said, the teams that I had ranked over them, the Celtics and the Thunder, still think they're better teams. This has not moved the needle in that regard, but I think the Knicks have gotten closer to that A tier of contender off of the back of this Karl Anthony Towns move than where I had them previously. However, I would give them the best chance specifically because I think they match up super well versus Boston. I'm rather disappointed that we didn't end up getting that conference finals matchup because we could have seen more evidence of that, but that only becomes more the case after the addition of Mikal Bridges. They have some phenomenal wing defense available to them. Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, and Mikal Bridges is one of the best defensive wing trios ever That's such a remarkably good, like, we're talking about a guy who was in Defensive Player of the Year voting, I believe got second place in McHale. OG has been known as one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA for a couple of years now, and Josh Hart, while he's not quite on their echelon, as a whole ends up being a very valuable defensive player because he's also a comically good rebounder for being 6'4". So you have all that good perimeter defense. Mitchell Robinson makes for a good rim protector, though the center position is the biggest one of concern for New York, and I think they match up super well against Boston. And having that being that that's the top dog in the conference, well, that probably gives them the best odds in the East of winning, because whoever I think can beat the Celtics has the best odds, and they're really the only one that I see that happening for real as a genuine possibility. I would still pick Boston to win that series, hence why I have them ranked higher, but if there's any team in the East that I think can upset Boston, it is New York. Now, speaking of, we're down to our last two teams, and you can probably surmise who they are. I think I've mentioned this ranking a few times in videos in the past already, but Boston is actually my number 2, while I have the OKC Thunder as my number 1 contender. And here is why. I understand I have a reputation for hating the Celtics, and that's because I do. But I think I'm pretty decent at being objective about it. I picked them to win the fucking Eastern Conference last year. I only didn't pick them to win the championship because I thought Denver would prove to be better than they ended up doing and they wouldn't get such an unfavorable matchup. But Boston is no doubt the top dog in the Eastern Conference, and I would be pretty surprised if they were not representing the East in the finals this year. However, this isn't a vendetta against Boston. This is a vendetta against the concept of repeat champions, because we have not seen a repeat champion since 2018. And before that, there was a decent stretch all the way until 2012 and 2013 with the Miami Heat. So repeat champions are harder and harder in the modern NBA. We have gotten a new team every single year. Not only have we not gotten repeat champions, we haven't even gotten like a team that won 2 in 3 or 4 or 5 years. So it often seems in the modern NBA, you get your championship and then you're done. What I will say about Boston is that the reason that that has consistently happened isn't as prominent for them, because they paid all their guys. All their guys are under contract. They didn't lose anybody important like the Nuggets did when they lost Bruce Brown, like the Lakers did when they lost Alex Caruso, like the Bucks did when they lost PJ Tucker. Like the key role player guys, they kept all of them around. So that factor is there. There's also the factor that they didn't have a super long playoff run. Obviously, they made it to the finals and won, but the finals was a 5-game series. The conference finals was a 4-game series. I'm trying to remember what their second round matchup even was, but their first round matchup was really brief as well. So they didn't actually get too banged up. They also didn't put an overly large amount of pressure on their body. So from that front, I think they are the most well-equipped to repeat of any of the champions we have seen since 2019. But I am not going to predict a repeat champion again until it happens. If OKC wins the title this year, they will not be my championship favorite for 2026. They won't. I don't want to predict that that's going to happen because it feels like the landscape of the modern NBA is making that more and more impossible. But as I mentioned, Boston has the best chance, and really for me, between them and OKC, it's kind of a coin toss. But let me talk about why I'm so high on OKC. Obviously, I think SGA is a better player than Jason Tatum if we're just talking about these top-tier teams, and I think that is a factor that matters here, but they managed to be pretty much as deep as the Boston Celtics are. I don't think they have a second-best player who's as good as Jaylen Brown is, but, you know, if Jalen Williams ends up being near that, that wouldn't surprise me. If Chet Holmgren ended up being near that in year 2, that wouldn't necessarily surprise me either. I'm expecting rather significant leaps from them, both of those guys being players who are already really good. But when I'm saying leap, I mean going from contender to top dog to you don't want to fucking see this team in the playoffs. And if you go down the depth chart, and again, an emphasis being on how good and how important depth is on this team or in the modern NBA right now, let's just go ahead and look at dudes who like I would consider playoff rotation worthy, even just the guys who are like good playoff rotation options. So they have SGA, Isaiah Hartenstein, Lou Dort, Isaiah Joe, Chet Holmgren, Aaron Wiggins, Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace, and Jalen Williams. That is, what is that? That's an 8-9 players deep. I also think Kenrich Williams can get in the fold there, and that's not too bad of a problem for you. This is such a deep team. There's so many good options here, and I think they're going to be the best team in the Western Conference. I see no reason for them not to be essentially top 5 in both offense and defense. They were last year, so it only makes sense that that would hold up, if not improve. I think they're going to win 60 games. I think they're going to be the team to be fearful of in the 2025 postseason. But I understand that that's probably a controversial take. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys would do, how you would rank them. Real quick, let me just go through this list again. And actually, I'm going to go from the list from the top all the way to the bottom of my 1 through 30. So in the contender category, at number 1, we have OKC. Number 2, we have Boston. 3, the Knicks. 4, the Mavericks. 5, the Sixers. 6, the Grizzlies. 7, the Bucks. 8, the Nuggets. And 9, the Timberwolves. Then when we get into the more mediocre teams in the NBA, the middle of the pack, not good, not bad, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers at 10, Sacramento Kings at 11, 12 is the Pelicans, 13 the Magic, 14 the Pacers, 15 the Lakers, 16 the Clippers, 17 the Spurs, 18 the Suns, 19 the Warriors, and 20 the Miami Heat. And then ranking of all of the bad teams, the Atlanta Hawks at 21, Hornets at 22, Rockets at 23, Jazz at 24, Pistons at 25, Raptors at 26, Blazers at 27, Bulls at 28, Nets at 29, and Wizards at 30. So that is my power rankings going into the 2024-2025 NBA season. Let me know what your power rankings are below, and shout out to Nick for editing this video, but that is it. Goodbye.